Welcome, one and all, sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, to another one of my special wizard tales.
Anna and the King. In old Siam, known today as Thailand, lived a very powerful and wise ruler, King Mongkut. In 1860, he decided to have his children taught the ways of the West, so that they knew both worlds, East and West. In London, an English widow in her 30s was chosen to be their tutor. Her name was Mrs. Anna Leonowens, the mother of a 12-year-old boy, Louis. A short time later, they set sail for Siam. The arrival of Anna's ship many weeks later was watched with great interest by the king from a window of his Bangkok palace. He decided it was time to tell his son, Crown Prince Chulalongkorn, of his plan.
"No, father, I do not want to go to school,"
shouted the headstrong prince.
"You must, my son.
Said the king firmly.
You must learn the ways of the West. The future of Siam depends on it."
The king summoned his manservant, Kibu, and commanded him,
Kibu, take Prince Chulalongkorn to the wharf and welcome our English guest.
Iki, the prince's pet monkey, went with them. After finding Anna and Louis at the wharf, Kibu quickly introduced the prince. Anna tried to shake hands with him, which made the prince very angry. Anna then gave the prince a respectful, small curtsy. The prince glared at her and then turned his gaze to Louis.
"You bow,"
he shouted.
"Don't bow, Louis.
Murmured Anna to Louis.
An English gentleman bows only to his sovereign, Queen Victoria."
In a sudden rage, the prince jumped forward and kickboxed Louis sharply on the shin, making Louis leap in the air with pain.
"How dare you! I am an English subject!"
cried Louis, clenching his fists in anger. Iki quickly jumped between the two boys and pushed them apart. To Anna and Louis's astonishment, they rode on 2 elephants to the palace. Arriving at the gates, Anna inquired,
"The king's agent in London promised us our own quarters."
Kibu explained that the king had 2 very important guests staying in the guest house, and in the meantime, Anna and Louis were commanded to live at the palace. Kibu apologized.
Yes, His Majesty's orders. Very sorry."
Anna was very upset. It was obvious the king had broken his word. When Anna met the king, she also made only a quick curtsy to him, and Louis only nodded his head respectfully. The king could scarcely believe what he had seen. He turned to Kibu and inquired,
Kibu, they did not bow.
Yes, Majesty."
replied Kibu, thinking quickly, explaining that they had made special English bows of respect to him. At that moment, the king's wife, Madame Chang, and all the royal children entered the room. The children climbed up to the throne, and some sat on the king's knee and kissed him, making him smile. After seeing the king with his children, Anna felt better.
"So, he does have a nice side,"
she observed. But when Anna mentioned that she was unhappy with the accommodation arrangements, the king grew very angry and told Anna,
The guest house is for guests, not for servants.
Anna was furious and informed the king.
"I am not, and neither is my son, ever your servant."
The king said that he would consider the matter, but in the meantime, Anna would have to stay in the women's quarters. Inside the nursery, watched by the scornful prince, Louis was unpacking. The prince teased Louis and then scattered Louis's books.
Foreign fool,
He jeered. Louis forced himself to remain calm. At that moment, Madame Chang entered. Seeing the torn book, she asked,
"Did you do this, Prince Chulalongkorn?"
The prince lowered his head with guilt.
"Then, Master Louis, I apologize to you on behalf of Prince Chulalongkorn, on behalf of my family and all of Siam."
This made the prince resent Louis even more. In the women's quarters, Anna was sitting gloomily on her bed with her unpacked bags. Before her stood Kibu, trying to cheer her, but it was almost impossible. Anna was already thinking of going back to England.
No, Miss Anna, no.
Shouted Kibu in panic.
We'll make King very angry.
I couldn't care less about a king who breaks his word.
Replied Anna. Meanwhile, in the guest house, the king's two guests were scheming about how much money they would soon receive. They had convinced the king that in order for Siam to be respected in the West, he would need to buy some of the finest paintings in the world. The two men, one named Lumsden and a painter called Arif, had posed as reputable art dealers, but in truth, they were a pair of criminals who sold fake paintings for large amounts of gold to unsuspecting people like the king.
This fake art business ain't half bad for a lurk, is it, Arif, eh?
Lumsden bragged to Arif, who was hard at work painting a fake. The next morning, at their first day at school, Anna showed the children a map of the world and asked them to repeat it after her.
Map of the world.
They said. Suddenly, there was the sound of snoring from the back. It was the naughty prince pretending to be asleep. Anna prodded him gently to wake him. The prince became very angry and shouted,
No, not like West, only like Siam.
And ran from the room. Anna quickly put Louis in charge of the class and went to bring the prince back. Outside, the king was strolling around the palace. As he rounded a corner, the prince ran around from the opposite direction and they collided. A moment later, Anna appeared and told the king that his son had run away from class. But to Anna's shock and surprise, the king blamed her, saying,
Do not make this happen again. I forbid you.
The prince was sent back to the classroom. Suddenly, the king's mood changed.
Do you know anything about art, Anna?
He asked, before guiding her towards the guest house. Back in the classroom, Icky was leading Louis on a merry chase, making all the children laugh. When the prince came back to class, he could not stop from laughing too, finally breaking the ice between the two boys. Back at the guest house, the two thieves saw the king and Anna approaching and quickly packed all the fake paintings, leaving only one original painting sitting on an easel. At first, Lumsden was suspicious, but when the king said Anna was a teacher, Lumsden relaxed and showed them the Mona Lisa. The king and a surprised Anna were most impressed.
The Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world.
Gasped Anna.
Now, gentlemen, how much?
Asked the king.
Oh, just 200 gold bars, your majesty.
Replied Lumsden. The king invited the two men and Anna to the palace for dinner that night. Meanwhile, the prince and Louis were playing piggy in the middle near the guest house. When their ball landed near the window, the two boys saw the men at work inside, painting fake masterpieces.
We must tell father straightway about these fakes,
said the prince. They began to run to the palace, but were forced to hide in the bushes when Lumsden and Arif passed them on their way to dinner. A few minutes later, the boys burst into the dining room, where the king and Anna were waiting. But the king told his son,
Whatever it is can wait until after I have entertained my...
At that moment, Kibu announced the arrival of Lumsden and Arif. The king dismissed the boys and ordered Kibu to bring on the banquet. Outside, the prince and Louis decided to take matters into their own hands. Returning to the guest house, they made their way in and with Icky's help, began taking the original paintings out of their crate and replacing them with the fakes.
That'll put a fly in their jolly ointment,
said Louis. The next morning, the thieves brought what they thought were the fake paintings to the throne room, where the king was waiting with his gold. The king asked to see the Mona Lisa again, making the two scoundrels most nervous. The prince and Louis, watching, could barely contain themselves. When Arif opened the crate and Lumsden saw the real Mona Lisa, his eyes popped in horror.
The real Mona Lisa?
he shouted. The king asked,
So, there is something wrong with him?
No.
replied Lumsden, feeling sick in his stomach. Although the boys remained quiet, Icky began gesturing and making faces, making Lumsden aware the fakes had been switched by the boys for the originals.
Stung by a monkey and a couple of rats. I'll be blowed,
muttered Lumsden. Lumsden and Arif took the gold bars and quickly departed. When Louis tried to explain what had taken place, the king grew angry and asked Anna,
Do you teach your son to lie too?
which made Anna very annoyed. Just then, Kibu rushed in, holding one of the fakes he had found hidden near the guest house. The king was furious, declaring,
They must not leave Siam.
and shouted for the guards. The prince and Louis quietly made their way out, determined to stop Lumsden and Arif themselves. In the jungle, the thieves were riding their getaway elephant when it suddenly went berserk and began charging through the undergrowth. A large branch knocked the two men and the crate of gold bars from its back. Not far behind, following the thieves' trail, rode the prince and Louis. The prince told Louis that he had something important to say.
I am sorry, Louis, for what I did to you with your books and the names.
Then Louis apologized for things he had said to the prince, and the two boys promised to be friends forever. Suddenly, Lumsden and Arif jumped on the boys from the branches of a tree above and took them hostage. But with the help of Icky calling instructions to them from up in the trees, the elephants swatted the thieves off their backs with their trunks, allowing Louis and the prince to jump down and run off. Directed by Icky from the treetops, the boys quickly made their way to a rickety wooden bridge leading over shark-infested waters to a small island, and made their way across, the two angry thieves following them. The weight of the four snapped the ropes holding the bridge together, leaving them hanging above the water. Louis and the prince scrambled up the rope ahead of the thieves, and then Icky cleverly swung across the chasm on a heavy vine, allowing the boys to climb on and swing back to the other side with him, leaving the thieves stranded on the island.
Man say no monkey business. He not know Icky.
Laughed the prince. Back at the palace, Anna, still fuming about the treatment of Louis and herself, informed the king she was resigning. The king was unimpressed.
Nothing would make me happier, woman. You are dismissed.
Louis and the prince and Icky were appalled because they knew it would end their friendships. That night, the prince and Icky crept into Louis's room and woke him.
What can we do?
He asked. Louis suddenly had an idea. The next day, the prince brought all of his brothers and sisters to the classroom. Almost 6 weeks later, on the day before Anna and Louis were to leave Siam, Anna was standing near a small lake on the palace grounds, watching Louis and the prince play, their laughter echoing across the water. Anna felt sad because she knew her son had changed since leaving England, and she also knew that the royal children needed her desperately. Behind her, she heard the king clearing his throat.
Our sons are happy, Mrs. Leonowens.
He said,
You leave tomorrow, yes?
Yes.
replied Anna hesitantly. The king asked her and Louis to dine with him at the palace that night, and Anna agreed. In the dining room that evening, the king asked Anna to read a letter written to him in English. She was about to, when led by Louis, the royal children entered the room.
My children want to say goodbye.
Said the king.
No, father.
Said one of the smaller princesses.
We had to say goodbye. We want Miss Anna stay here in Siam.
Louis then stepped forward and announced the children had a surprise. He turned to them and began conducting as they sang the letters of the alphabet.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z.
was delighted, but the king was mystified.
I understand ABC, Father.
Said Prince Chulalongkorn, who had just entered the room.
You can read in English?
Asked the king, picking up the letter from the table and thrusting it at him. In halting, clear English, the prince read the letter. When he had finished, the prince looked at his father.
I too wish for Miss Anna to stay.
He said. The king paused and then smiled, looking at Anna.
I may be all-powerful King of Siam, but even I cannot force her to stay.
There is no need.
Replied Anna softly.
We will stay.
And that is precisely what they did.
And thus another fine wizard tale concludes. Sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, join me again soon for another classic tale. Won't you?